Hi, I'm Haley Mills, the podcast producer for Integration Nation. In this conversation, Alison talks with Paige Flink, CEO of The Family Place, about parenting, more specifically when under siege. Thanks for taking the time to join us for this episode, and I'll touch base with everybody afterwards to sum up what Alison and Paige talked about and to give you a heads up on what to look forward to in the upcoming episodes as we expand on the idea of identity.
Hi, I'm Alison Sullivan, a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist, and you are listening to Integration Nation, a podcast to introduce you to and expand your knowledge about effective, integrative mental health concepts, practices, and approaches. In continuation with our theme this season on integrating aspects of our identity, I am going to be talking with Paige Flink today. Paige is the CEO of The Family Place, the largest family violence service organization in North Texas. Paige has been a vocal advocate for ending family violence since she joined the organization in 1991. She has been instrumental in changing public perception and the North Texas community's response to family violence. In doing so, she has received local and national recognition for her work on behalf of survivors, including the Peace Award from the Sunshine Lady Foundation, the Women's Advocacy Award from Legal Aid of Northwest Texas, and the Texas Women's Foundation Mora Award, Mosaic Family Services Champion of Human Rights Award, and CEO of the Year from the Center for Nonprofit Management in Dallas. And so, what a great companion to talk about parenting, especially when there is an abusive dynamic between the parents. Paige is immersed in this work day in and day out in the trenches. So talking about the role of parenting and how to integrate that aspect of our identity is an important part of our identity work. And when there are factors that include violence, it's not really the same task as just coming to terms with our role as a parent in a non-abusive dynamic. So those of you who are parents in a non-abusive dynamic, this episode can still be helpful and informative, not only for you, but in helping you understand others' experiences. And if you yourself have parented in an abusive dynamic, or are concerned that you may be parenting in an abusive dynamic, this is an episode that you may find really useful. As always, we want to offer a content warning because we are going to be talking about domestic violence. And if that's based on where you are in your healing journey, if that's not something that you think is going to be of benefit to you right now, then by all means, turn this episode off and take the time to maybe listen to one of our self-care minis or some of the episodes in season 2 that talk about self-care and self-love and empathy. If you're staying with us for this important episode, before we get going, I want to thank one of our sponsors, Dragonfly Yoga of Fredericksburg. Dragonfly is such an important resource in our Fredericksburg community because they truly offer an inclusive yoga community, providing classes from introductory yoga all the way to advanced classes and everything in between. They have workshops nearly every single weekend on various aspects of yoga, mindfulness, meditation, wellness. They have workshops to include parents and family, which is of special interest to us in this episode. And their teachers are not only skilled in the practice of yoga, but also really committed to meeting their students where they are. So you'll want to check them out at dragonflyyogafred.com, or you can go by Dragonfly Yoga Studio in person. You can find them at 810 Caroline Street, right in the heart of downtown Fredericksburg. Okay, everybody, please enjoy this important conversation with Paige Flink. All right, Paige, welcome to this episode of our podcast, Integration Nation. I am so excited to have you here with us to talk about this important topic. And I'd like to start out with you maybe explaining to our listeners a little bit about you.
Well, I'm the CEO of The Family Place, and our mission at The Family Place is to stop family violence. So every day's a new day when you're dealing with a population who has great need and also has experienced trauma and lived in chaos. So my general job is just to be the fundraiser, the administrator, the spiritual leader, the person who's the cheerleader for the staff I have that do the hard work, and also just to make sure that we have enough funds and availability to help people when they need that help.
What a noble mission. And that mission is why I wanted to have this conversation with you today, because we're here to talk about identity as it relates to parenting, and specifically parenting when domestic violence is involved, has been involved, is currently involved. You know, our focus this season on the podcast is on something we're calling internal intersectional identity. And so basically what that means is the factors, the roles that we hold throughout our lifetime and the sociological factors that influence those roles. We need to weave those together in a mindful way to really develop a comprehensive and cohesive understanding of who we are across time. And we're using my own story this season in a general way. And in my story, domestic violence was a part of my role as a parent, and it impacted how I connected with myself as a mother, how I was able to mother in every aspect and across time. It doesn't stop. And one of the primary ways that parenting was impacted was this kind of idea that I started to call triage parenting. And what I meant by that was, you know, because of the way custody was in my particular situation, there were times when I was in custody of my children that I felt the bulk of my parenting energy was spent on triaging a situation, like patching everybody up emotionally, making sure everybody kind of was able to process things and kind of get regrounded and restabilized and back into a predictable pattern, back into a predictable routine, and bandaged up, if you will, which was a profound loss, not only to me, but to the children. And I know that my experience is not unique in that. I also know that there are many other ways that domestic violence can impact people's integration of their role as a parent. And so I wondered if you could talk to us about some of those ways.
Yes, so I appreciate that you knew what was going on as it was happening to you. So often I see moms who they don't realize, or they think, unfortunately, that their kids don't see it, especially if they're co-parenting in the house and they're still living with the abusive partner. They think that if they just maintain this stiff upper lip or this happy smiley face or whatever, that the kids aren't affected. And so we all know that they are, and we know that kids sense everything. I mean, kids in the babes in arms sense what's going on. And so sometimes moms want to just fool themselves into thinking it's happening to me, but it's not happening to them. And one of the things I always talk about when I get the chance to talk to moms is I hear them say, he's a really good dad. He cannot be a good dad if he abuses
cannot be a good dad,
the mother of the kids. And so too often, that's what we want to believe as, victims and survivors of domestic violence. So, man, I think that's a place to start. Is you have to be true to yourself. You can't sugarcoat the reality. And it's really better for your kids if you don't, because helping them accept where it is at that moment is really what they need. And so, this is what we're dealing with, and this is who your father is. And it's hard to use the word, for me, respect, but sometimes you have to use that word as respecting his authority in this situation, or at least you're co-deciding. But it's really hard. I mean, one of the horriblest, worst things I see for women is when they are trying to co-parent and they're trying to be strict. And then they drop the kids off in the father's house and it's all, who cares, happy-go-lucky, stay up all night, eat junk food all day, risky behaviors. And then the mom has to come back and be the bad guy. And so we see that happen a lot. And that they're stuck not only bandaging, but also being the adult in the family.
Right. The only adult.
Right. Right. And so finding allies, I think, is one of the things that a parenting mom could really do, whether it's the grandparents or a really close friend who can take the kids sometimes and they can see a situation, see other people, role model other relationships and families. But one of the insidious things that happens in families where there is this kind of violence is the secrecy that is required. And so that can really, especially for young boys, really, really hurt them down the road because they can't talk about it. They can't express how mad it makes them when they see that their dad do that to their mother or the father figure in the home do that to their mother. And that rage and anger grows and grows and then comes out in really awful ways. And so I most often think that the moms really want to protect their children, but sometimes they just need help knowing that they aren't able to at this moment. So let us all join. There's no crime in sharing your story. This is not your deal. He's doing it to you all. And so trying to find a way to make that a reality, I think, is also really important.
Yeah, you brought up several really important points, I think. The first one that I wanted to talk a little bit more about is this idea of co-parenting, because in your average divorce or separation, there are a lot of resources that can really promote and educate and support a co-parenting approach. However, domestically violent relationships, emotionally abusive relationships, that's not really a possibility, nor is it really applicable because there's not a shared goal of protecting and promoting the health and welfare of the children, regardless of what the construction of the violent relationship is, whether it's same sex, whether it's heteronormative, whatever the construction is, as long as there is abuse on the scene, then there's coercion and there's control, and everybody becomes a part of that matrix. And one of my continual frustrations in my own experience and in working with other women in my practice, my private practice, is this notion that the legal system still has of co-parenting as a possibility in these situations because it is not a possibility.
I know it. I wish the bar, the family law bar would really help us more in that situation, just to communicate it more, or certainly more, in law school teaching and talking about what to do when you have families that are disintegrating and they're coming to you to get a divorce, and how can you, as whichever party you represent, make sure that the kids are the ones that we focus on the most. I mean, in Dallas, we at the Family Place actually run a supervised visitation and exchange center. And so it's free of charge, and you can only get sent there by the courts, but you have to prove that there was domestic violence in the relationship. That's the only way you would get sent there. And so again, women who are reluctant to call the police, I understand it 100%. But when it goes down the road and you've never told anybody and you don't have a medical record and you don't have anything that would get us a credible finding of family violence, then you can't get supervised visitation or supervised exchanges or any of those things, at least not in Dallas County. And so in Texas. And so that's something I would encourage any listener to think about is, do I need to document what's happening to me? Do I need to take pictures of it? Should I write a journal? What can I do? Can I go to the doctor? Can the doctor, report it and record it for me? Because down the road, you may need that. And so it's just like having a little bit of, ammunition in your back pocket, if you will, to know that somehow when the time comes, I might at least get primary conservatorship. In Texas, if there is credible evidence of domestic violence, the judge is not supposed to award joint conservatorship. And they're also not supposed to, if you tell your attorney and you're a domestic violence victim and you tell your attorney, they're not supposed to order you to mediation. Because mediation is where that power and control imbalance really happens. It's where the danger can be. And so, those are tools we have, but not every judge does it. We as advocates wind up fighting all the time to say, how could you put those two parents in the same room? How could you have them come in the same door for mediation? I mean, what are you thinking? You shouldn't be doing that. It takes a village for all of us because there are all these different elements. And that's what makes it so hard to experience like what you did, is there are so many intersections of systems and criminal justice and family courts and attorneys and the schools and all of those things that you're a superhero. You are a superhero if you survive this and you're able to get some semblance of stability for your kids. And we always have to remember they're just worth fighting for. And I hate it. It kills me when I see a woman who's just like, I've given up. He can have the kids. I'm like, oh no, please don't give up. I get it too. It happens.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to the desperation of the situation and the impact of abuse over time. It can really erode a person's sense of self. And so their connection to what they're even capable of doing becomes so distorted. There's a subset of violent relationships that I think is especially difficult for parenting. And that's relationships that are primarily psychologically and emotionally abusive and physically intimidating, because there are very few states. I think it was maybe Oregon.
Is that
just recently?
I didn't even know that there was one. So
I don't quote me on that. I wish we had a fact check, but I just read in the last month where one state began to recognize emotional abuse as domestically violent. And that, I think, is a huge population of people that just really have no protections legally when you're talking about this. Relationships that are absolutely abusive, absolutely domestically violent, and primarily emotionally and psychologically violent really can't, based on what the court's definition of violence is, really can't prove anything and are very limited in how they can protect themselves and their children and the sanctity of that parenting role.
Mm-hmm. I know it's hard. And I recognize that so many people experience that. So again, just trying to get private therapy, find a way for you to build yourself up as strong as possible, because it is going to be hard and it's going to take time, and you have to physically take care of yourself. You have to feed yourself. You have to feed your soul. You have to do everything you can to stay as strong as possible, because you're going to battle. And so trying to reach down and find that in your body to be able to say, I know it's going to be awful, but my kids are worth it. And eventually they'll be 18. So if you can just keep terrible things from happening to them, or maybe they'll even be 12 and you can get the money and go back to court and change the arrangements where the kids actually get to make some form of a decision. And so, but documentation is always your friend. I mean, the more you document it, and sometimes these guys just get tired of it. They're just there for the sport for a little while. And then after a while, they're not into it and they don't want to be a part of it. And they're not really caring. They just are doing it to prick their partner. And so, and I'm sure that in same-sex relationships, this is also, it happens equally. So, I mean, I've heard women, especially that have brought kids to the relationship, and then they wind up with these really with a female partner, and it's hard. It's really it's a challenge to keep their kid or whatever. So, I just think it's great to be able to talk about it. The more you talk about it, the less it feels like it's such a secret. And I think secrets, as I said earlier, secrets are insidious and they are not healthy, and keeping them are impossible.
Yes, I think in recovery circles, there's a saying that you're only as sick as your secrets. And I think that that's really important when we're talking about parenting, and we're talking about parenting and, where in families where there's a history of violence. You brought up another really important point that I think really matters for people to hear. And that is talking about kind of the cohesive narrative, the reality testing, we call it in my business, and how important that is to be honest and direct and upfront with children and with yourself about what's going on. Because I think you are right. In my experience in working with people, intuitively, the protective instinct kind of shows up as, I have to patch this up. I have to kind of gloss this over. I have to pretend it's not as bad as it is, because that's going to make my kids feel better and feel safer over time, when actually psychologically calling a spade and helping children develop resiliency through building a community in the school, in any faith-based communities that are available, in extracurricular activities, in exposure to friends and friends' families that aren't violent and that don't have violence within the family. helping kids do that, especially with counseling in the mix, if that's possible, allows kids to say, yes, what I feel is happening, and I can figure out how to keep myself safe and focus on other things so that I can develop resiliency.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I just think that the more support, it's sort of like if you're building a bridge, the more pillars you have underneath that bridge, the easier it's going to be to walk across it. And so for a family, the more touch points and the more people who are honest and that they can come and cry on somebody else's shoulder besides mom, because a lot of times you see the teenagers feel like they have to be tough. They have to take care of their sibling. They wind up in this parenting role because mom is weepy and hurting and all those things, which she has a right to be. But then those kids need a place to go and weep. And so it's just, don't let it be a secret. It is not your fault. Just don't make it a secret. I understand the shame, and a lot of that shame is rooted in other places, or, in your past and all of those things too, which a therapist can certainly help address. But this problem, this abuser, this situation, it doesn't have to be kept a secret. And so, schools are getting more and more educated about what happens when there's two parents, and a wise teacher can see who's the manipulator and who is the supportive parent. And so the more, getting there and talking about it and just saying, I want you to know this is happening. And so my son may be really angry because he's going to his dad's tomorrow. And so when he comes into school the next day, he may be angry. And please just understand that we have to love him through that. And so everyone wants the success for those kids. And so engage other people, whether it's brothers and big brothers, big sisters, or like you said, the faith community, or coaches, good coaches and friends. And, a lot of times the friends are the ones who can do the best reflecting for those kids because they can tell the truth and hear it back at them. But just to say, it doesn't really matter, or it's going to be okay. I mean, to say we're going to work to get it okay, but it feels really terrible right now. Let them have it, let them, don't try to make it feel like you have to be tough.
Yeah. I think that part of the grief associated with this that people have to confront is that, part of the cost of an abusive relationship is isolation and self-doubt and kind of intense questioning about, your judgment in situations. And so, the irony is that that's actually building a community and being vulnerable and asking for help and accepting help and trusting your judgment, and that are the things that are going to build a network of support beams around the person and their children. And yet, they need to do that at a time in their life where they probably feel most often least capable of doing that and least safe doing that, because I know one of the primary ways that abusive relationships impact the victim or the survivor is kind of weaponizing vulnerability.
Right. Yeah. It also, secrecy. I just can't say enough about that, because if no one knows that this charismatic, handsome person belittles you, puts you down, picks on you, cheats on you, makes you feel this big, but is such a happy-go-lucky person when they're out in the community and everybody wants to be their friend, it's really hard. Then you think you're the crazy one. And so if you're questioning it, it's probably worth trusting your gut.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so let's switch gears for a minute and talk about how Family Place, and in your experience as the director of Family Place, how trauma-informed care matters in these situations.
I've been at this for 29 years. And so that's a newish term. And for something that we all have done for many years. And that's really just that the person who's coming in the door knows best what they need. That's sort of the way we work it. And that you're the judge. We don't judge them. Where you are is where you are. How can we build you up and strengthen you to get to wherever you want to go next? And so for us, trauma-informed care doesn't mean that you're not accountable for things that you do. And sometimes you see places that just want them to, own your pain and do all those things, but not required to show up for anything. Well, you've got to show up. Your life isn't going to change if you don't show up. And so there's a balance in accountability for us. And then also just having it very calming and very and focused on the person who's in front of us. Our spaces are beautiful. Our spaces are quiet. We try to give you places to have privacy. Families will share a bedroom because we have limited space and safety is important for everyone. But we try to have other ways that you can get privacy and have individualized care. So there is no cookie cutter. That is another way we see trauma-informed care is it's not a check these boxes and you're finished, but it is what's your map and where do you want to go and what's your map and where do you want to go. But we don't do any drug or alcohol testing to keep you out of services. We don't do anything at all that would keep you from being here. And some of my sister organizations do. And that is not trauma-informed. That is judging. We all know why someone would get high before they came here. First of all, why would you want to go in a shelter for one thing? But also, a lot of women are getting high because he makes her get high. Or they're getting high because they don't want to feel. We understand those things. So how can we get you to, that's what you're using to cope. Good, you found a coping mechanism. It's not the healthiest one, but at least you're coping to get you through to the next piece of it. And so in a lot of cases, I get why people say that. But really, for me, trauma-informed care is focusing on what she or he brings to you and how can we let them be the judges of where they want to go.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's beautiful. And I think it's at the heart of what trauma-informed care is because it's putting the control back in the person's hands and it's validating, this is your life. You have the right to self-determination and we're here to support you. We're not here to judge you. We're not here to micromanage you. We're not here to control you because frankly, that's what, part of the problem has been for people that are in domestically violent situations. We're here to just help you find your map to healing and to support you in being accountable for that. Because you're right, there is a really important piece of, no, you're not responsible for the violence. No, you're not responsible for anything your former partner has done or is doing. You are responsible for healing, and we are here.
I see some of these, there's some organizations that just don't want to have any rules and sort of which doesn't work in a lot of cases, that you have to have curfews and you can't come in and be abusive to other people. I mean, those types of rules. But also I've seen some women who are like, I want to make a decision, but I just can't. Can you help me make it? Because sometimes you see people that are reluctant to give any advice. And where I come from, of course, I'm not a professional, but I've been at this long enough that I feel like I could have one of those things hanging on my wall. But it's that you can see, because she can't see the road right now. So help her see the road in a very gentle way, but just to give choices and advice on, if you do this, this is what might happen. If you do this, this is what might happen. Which of those things do you think will work best for you? As opposed to just reflective coaching and listening and stuff like that. So it's just sort of a long time of experience to see. We have to use all as advocates or as professionals, as you are, have a variety of ways we can help people.
Right. And what I'm hearing you say is that's kind of the guide on the side approach. That's not telling a person what they need to do. That's saying, here are some options and here are some ways to consider it. And what do how do you feel about this? And this is what, if you're thinking about this approach, these are some other factors that you may not be aware of that you may want to consider. I mean, I think that that's actually appropriate support in meeting someone where they are and helping them to rediscover their voice, which is, I think, at the heart of all care, whether we're going to term it trauma-informed care or holistic, respectful care or whatever term you want to give it, putting somebody in a place where they can rediscover their authentic voice and they can figure out how to access that agency to support that voice and start to build a life that makes sense to them, that provides meaning for them, that supports what their goals and dreams are. That's the whole point.
I have this, my favorite quote is the Winston Churchill, never, never, never quit. And when I talk to onboard our new team here at the Family Place, I talk about perseverance and how we have to persevere, because a lot of times the people who come to us have given up on themselves and their family has given up on them. So right now we're going to be the ones to help push through for them until they can push for themselves. And so, really just because people have quit. I mean, so many women their family don't want to hear about it. Their friends don't want to hear about it. They don't think they deserve having someone fight for them. And so if you have an ally in walking this walk, it makes you feel so much better because it helps share the burden a little bit, so that you matter. Having an ally matters.
You matter. Yeah, that's the whole point. And I think that's the essential harm to the parenting role in violent relationships is, you don't matter. You don't matter. What you have to say doesn't matter. What your thoughts and opinions are don't matter. What your choices are irrelevant. And so having advocates who can say, actually, you do matter. You don't have to feel like you do right now, but you do matter. And holding the line in that consistent way is a really powerful, stable, lighthouse, if you will, for people to hang on to.
So another dynamic we see, especially in women who come into our emergency shelters, is that they haven't been shown any respect by the other parent figure in the home. So they might make a decision and it's overturned, or they might have a disciplinary act and it's negated. And so therefore, the kids don't respect when suddenly the mom who's brought them to the shelter is the one who's going to be making the decisions and telling these kids, here's what's going to happen and here's how we're going to do this. And so we have to work a lot in family sessions to rebuild that trust in relationship that the kids are willing to listen to that mother as opposed to calling, the 7, 8-year-old boy calling his mother a bitch because that's what he saw his dad do to her. You can't tell me what to do, bitch. I mean, I hear it out of the mouths of babies practically. And so helping gain your footing as a disciplinary adult is also really, and it takes so much energy. And that's an important dynamic that we tell people when they come, your kids are going to act out. They've had to give up a lot. Here's how we're going to help support you through that. And don't lose your temper. Use consistency, because the other thing we see so much when there's been violence in the home is he'll beat the fool out of her if she doesn't get those kids quiet. And so the only thing she knows is brute force to get them to be quiet or to go to their rooms or to eat at the table or whatever, because there's just this instant compliance. So again, parenting is steps. It's not fast. And so helping people recognize that that's going to happen to them as well.
That's a really great point, and you're absolutely right. And much like any of our healing work that we have to do, I think it starts with basic stabilization, like you just mentioned, and restabilizing the family and restructuring and consistently supporting the new parental subsystem of that one parent and then the child subsystem underneath that, and where decisions and discipline flows and how to develop respectful communication and boundary setting and empathy skills, and all of those things do help down the road lay the groundwork for people to be able to do the deeper work that you referenced in, the chilling statement that I have heard so many times, that many of the parenting before these parents leave the violent relationship is based on survival and protection, not actual parenting and developing emotional regulation skills and social competence and, however you want to term it, but more along the lines of be quiet now so we all stay safe. Even in things as simple as a sibling argument, if those things get out of control too quickly, then that puts everybody at risk in the home. And so kind of relearning what's okay with kids' behavior, what's not okay, and how to manage conflict, what even is on the spectrum of normal sibling conflict, and what siblings are learning when they are having this conflict, and how to help everybody manage communication and emotions that go along with that is all a part of what needs to kind of get unlearned and reestablished.
The dynamic of being able to manage your emotions is really it's a hard thing, especially as for children. And so they haven't had that opportunity, and it's a long process. And so it's going to be, again, I don't ever, when I talk to somebody, when they say, well, I think I'm going to leave, I'm like, it's going to be bad. And I just want you to know that. Don't think you'll walk out and you'll feel a sense of relief for about, I don't know, an hour. And then reality sets in, and it's how am I going to survive, and how am I going to get these little kids to do what they need to do and where they need to go and all those things. And so just we as women building up other women to say, you can. You're tough. You can do it. You survived this much. You survived this asshole for 10 years. You're tougher than I am. So you can manage this. It'll be a rough 2 or 3 years, but eventually the mobile fits, gets itself righted, and then you're able to move on for yourself.
Yeah, and in my own experience, what adds to that is, which you can't know until you know it, is that on the other side of that work is real joy, is real freedom, is the opportunity to really have authentic relationships, not just with children, but, with friends and with extended family or with whoever, that there's a value to the work. There's beautiful blossoms that have the opportunity of blooming in doing the work. But when you start off with the work and the overwhelming amount of work that needs to be done, sometimes that is such an overwhelming prospect. It can keep people, I think, deluding themselves as to why it's probably better to stay in a relationship than it is to leave, because they've found a way sometimes to function in that. They've found a way to get through every day, and they're not sure that they can do that when they leave.
I never would ever tell anybody to leave ever, because we don't know the danger that they might be in if they do leave. But what I will say to them is, the longer you stay, the less of you there will be to get out when you're ready. And so, just take that as put it and think about it, and remember who you were before you got there. Sit off and be quiet and think about what I used to love to do, and the things I like to watch on TV, or the books I wanted to read, or the places I used to go. And then remember who that woman was, and then is she there, and where can you find her? And so,
yeah, where can you find her, and how can refinding her actually support you in parenting your children? Because, refinding her is essential, because then that's something that your kids really have to latch on to.
Yeah, mom who's not taking care of herself cannot take care of her kids.
Correct. Okay, so give us an overview of what the Family Place offers.
So we have the whole continuum of services for people who experience domestic violence or family violence. And so for us, we call ourselves the Family Place because it's not just intimate partner violence. It can actually be adults who were sexually abused by their parents as children, or 20-year-old woman whose father beats her up or rapes her in her home and she needs a place to stay. So we define it broadly. We serve women and men. We have 2 emergency shelters for women and children, and we opened in 2017 the first shelter for men that could bring their kids in the United States that was dedicated just for men and children. So, men who can bring their kids, but it's not just single men also come, just the same as our other programs. So we have 3 shelters in total. We have a small transitional living program where you can live for a longer time, because a shelter might be just 45 days, temporary. Stabilized, triage, can you get a job? Can you find a place to rent that fast? And then we have transitional housing, which is generally reserved for the young mom who's got 2 or 3 kids, and she's been parenting since she didn't really get the chance to complete an education or really get fully employed the way she needs to support the families. So that's a year-long program in transitional housing. We have a campus where we have 25 apartments. We also have a child development center. So there's a fully licensed daycare for kids that are 6 weeks to 5 years old, and then a kindergarten through 2nd grade school that all 3 shelters the kids have access to. And we have a kennel for people who will not leave without their pets, and people won't go because they're so afraid their animal might be mistreated when they left. And so we have that place for cats and dogs. That's our intervention for people in crisis. Then we work with the perpetrator of the violence. We have a batterers intervention program The majority of those people are ordered by the courts to come. They've been found guilty, but they're on probation. And so they come to 24 weeks if they are a misdemeanor offender. If they're a high-risk felony offender who is on probation, they go for 30 weeks. High accountability, really intense. We support them in coming to heal, but also most of these offenders, these perpetrators have also been hurt themselves. Very few of them grew up in in a regularly healthy home. They've been hurt and now they're hurting others. So that's an important program. And it's also the only place that we charge a fee because our shelter program is free. Then we have 3 offices where we do counseling. We do case management and counseling, and we have the whole spectrum of therapy from talk therapy, CFTBT, EMDR, and then we do some peer support groups also, depending on where you are and what you need at that very moment for domestic violence survivors, but also for incest survivors, adults and children, in 3 locations. We have a program for if you need job training. We have a small employment assessment, resume writing, helping you develop the soft skills or hard skills so we can access training programs, because this is also an economic issue. A lot of women would leave if they could support themselves. And so we recognize that. So we try to find what tools do you need? Where can we connect you in the community? That's a Dignity at Work program. So we have a job training program. We do supervised visitation and exchange. So there are about 120 families every month who are either, most of them are dads that are being supervised because they were violent, but the judge wants them to have a relationship with the kids. There's also an economic reason to do that, because if a father can develop a relationship with those kids, he's more willing to pay child support. So that's a supervised visitation center. And then we do have a prevention program where we're in the schools, starting late elementary all the way through high school and some colleges, with healthy dating relationships, identifying the red flags in a relationship and also helping deal with it if you're in it. And so we do therapy work as well as just pure big support groups for the different youth, depending on the schools. Some of them are kids that are experiencing it and they want us to work with them. Others are peer groups who become the leaders in their schools, and then they can help their friends make good choices. So it's a whole continuum of services. And we're big. We provide the most services in the state of Texas. And I'm just really proud of the fact that the community supports us with funding, because they recognize how important it is to support these people that need to leave these violent homes. Because I keep trying to communicate to my community that if we don't focus on these families that aren't healthy at this moment, it doesn't matter how good your school system is or how great you have an intervention, because everything goes back to this family, whether it's sex trafficking or kids who run away from home or gangs or teenage pregnancy or crime. All of those, poor performance in schools, all goes back to a family that's not functioning. So if we don't take care of our families, it doesn't matter what else is going on, because eventually it will all affect the outcomes.
Absolutely. And wow. I mean, that really does embody, in my mind, the true definition of comprehensive continuum of care, because the services you described run the spectrum from preventative services, through crisis intervention to long-term care and job skills training and therapy and all of the recovery and remediation-based services that are necessary. So it's every point in the spectrum. And congratulations in getting a shelter for men and children set up, because that is a population. I mean, I think that statistics matter, and men are also in abusive relationships, and men who have been in abusive relationships do have the role of parent impacted as it relates to their identity. And there's a different kind of shame attached to that injury. And so recognizing that that's real and creating a shelter for men and children is a really beautiful, I think, important step in inclusive, comprehensive care for family violence, because there's not just one type of family that suffers from family dysfunction and family violence. It can happen to any construction of family.
As we have opened this shelter, that was 2017 when we finally got it completely open. And now I'm seeing more shelters happening. And so, we're wound up talking a lot in Washington about it, to the Health and Human Services and Administration for Children and Families, to say it can't be just female focused. We've got to really look at this with a gender neutral lens, understanding that women are overwhelmingly the victims and overwhelmingly dominated. And, all of those things are true. But when they need you, you need to be able to serve them, just like whatever the population or the language barrier or any, orientation. When it's your time, you need it, whether you're one of 1,000 or, 90 out of 100. You know what I mean? It's just when you're needed, when you need the help, you need the help. And so I'm really proud of our work of being able to do that, and our community being willing to support funding for it. So I can see that because this work with men that we do on the offender side, so much of it is what they've been socialized to think they have to be. And so finding a way to address that you don't have to be tough. You don't have to be the mean guy. You don't have to cheat on your wife because everybody else does. All of those things that we've socialized men into thinking flow into this issue that we deal with. And so finding ways to get men to feel and to, I know that word toxic masculinity has a lot of detractors to it, but they've been men who have been in toxic situations, men who have been made toxic by the way they were raised. And so it doesn't have to be that way. So the offender work we do is important, especially for a women's organization. And it's changed. I've been here long enough. When we first started our men's program in the mid-'80s, I wasn't even here. And then it was really like, how dare you take money from a women's shelter and spend it on these nasty men? And so we've gotten past that point. But finding new ways to help the men who hurt others or the women who hurt others, I think we've got to figure that out, and not always punitive. And so kind of thinking down the road, what are ways we can do this? Women don't call the criminal justice system because they don't want the police in their life, because in some communities, CPS gets called. And so, how do you take it from being, but it's a crime that they're committing, whether it's against the law or not, it's still a crime, as far as what you're doing to that child who sees that happen. So it's still early. If you think about the things that we treat in society, we've been fighting civil rights for a long time. That was the 60s. Well, the first shelter in the United States wasn't until the late 70s, and it wasn't against the law in the state of Texas to beat your wife until 1986. That's not that long ago. So we're on this spectrum of making it better. At the same time, the rage and the anger and the access to weapons and all those things is frightening. So we've just got to figure out, where do we get in this spectrum of creating peaceful environments and do what we can for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that systems approach that you just referenced about understanding that there are institutionalized systems in place, patriarchal, the patriarchal system that we are all a part of, hurts us all. It doesn't just hurt women, it hurts us all. Men pay a dear price as well. There's maybe, I was just listening to something earlier today about this. There's maybe like 5 or 6% of men at the socioeconomic top of things that don't really suffer from a patriarchal system. But all the other men who don't fall into that 5 or 6% of the upper echelon suffer just as, maybe not just as much, I'm not sure you can say that, but suffer as well in unique ways from a patriarchal system. And so the more inclusive, truly inclusive that we can be in services, in definitions, and understanding a systems approach does allow us to create equitable solutions and does allow us to redefine the social support systems in our communities to help meet families actually where they are, so that it changes a culture of being reluctant to access help to a more open, transparent, safer way to access help.
If we can get away from blaming victims and considering if you ask for help, you're weak, those two things might change us a lot.
Oh my gosh. Isn't that the truth? Blaming the victim and asking for help is weak. Those are two great places to start. Okay, so Paige, thank you so much for taking time on this Friday evening to have such an important conversation. I really appreciate all of the work you do and all of the work you do on behalf of your community, but also in a larger scope, what your organization represents as a possibility for a template for more organizations to adopt to meet families where they are at every point in the spectrum, from preventative approaches to crisis care to repair work and recovery work that's necessary. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Happy to be a part.
Well, wow, that was a pretty important conversation, and I'm not sure how everyone listening experienced that, but I know that when we recorded that, I could feel the weight of the complexity of this situation in people's lives, and in sharing parts of my own experience in that way. And, when I listened to it, I felt kind of a resurgence of that weight, because parenting under these circumstances, parenting in general is a really challenging, rewarding, wonderful, miraculous experience that's also really complex. And when you add in the dynamic of abuse as it relates to our identity overall and as a parent, it just intensifies the complexity of that. And so I certainly experienced that, and I'm so grateful that Paige took the time to share with us the important work that the Family Place is doing. And my hope is that it underscores that resources like the Family Place exist all over, and that our conversation also kind of reminds people of the importance of honesty in developing resiliency. And sometimes we, in an effort to protect children, actually can make situations more confusing for them, because, we all can feel tension, and we know what it feels like to feel safe, and we know when we don't feel safe. And so really kind of if you're in this situation, finding resources to help you navigate it safely is a really high priority. And we will list, as we have done in prior episodes, some resources that are local to the Fredericksburg area, as well as national resources for you. So thank you again, Paige. And before I read today's letter, I just want to remind folks that utilizing this letter is an important way that we can kind of gain insight and awareness about how we are resolving the narrative of our story, and how we are making sense of the different roles that we play throughout our lives. And so my letter today obviously has a focus on abuse. And if that is not your experience with parenting, then just a reminder that the importance of these letters is not so much how much the content is similar or different from mine, but more of how much does the content accurately reflect your authentic experience of that role, of that aspect of self. I did today's letter a little differently, in that I wrote a blessing to the parent under siege. May you know that you are enough exactly as you are. May you find solace in authentic connection with yourself and your children. May you feel acknowledgement and validation from the loving intentions you hold as sacred for the safety and protection of your children. May your doubt and uncertainty be transformed into strength and into trust. May your heart take refuge in the enormity of your love and courage. May your spirit find rest in the certainty of your commitment to the truth. May your memories be preserved in appreciation of your efforts. And may the comfort of true humility allow you to let go of the weight of unrealistic expectations. You have nothing to prove and no one to convince. Your journey is yours alone. With deep respect, Alison.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Integration Nation. And as an important reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for care from a licensed therapist or any other healthcare professional. We are going to continue to explore and discuss with our guests throughout this season how to integrate our experiences, the roles that we take on, and the unique aspects of ourselves in developing and making sense of our identity across time. Our upcoming episode will be featuring international and local experts on gender, professionalism, libraries, and other important aspects of our identity. Listen to more episodes surrounding these concepts and integrative mental health at allisonsintegrativehealth.org.